Good morning, friends, and welcome to our class on the greatest moments from the autobiography. As I was chewing on this title the other day, I realized that it's a big promise to offer because the greatest moments, first of all, the greatest moments in this book are so subjective because for each one of us, it's that moment that we tune in, whatever aspect, scene, thought, phrase it is that helps us to tune into that vibration of Paramhansa Yogananda and subsequently of that divine consciousness. But also in rereading the text, yesterday, I set aside, I did some work in the morning and then I set aside the rest of the day from about 1 o'clock on to prepare for this class because I got it into my head that I would just reread the entire autobiography yesterday. And I got pretty close. There were a few chapters that I skipped that I figured I knew well and that I'd read many, many times. And I just sat down all day long and I had the audiobook on with Swami Ananda reading it to me and I had my book open and I was just playing along with the masters and with Yogananda through every moment of this text. And I was struck all night with just this sense of gratitude, because after spending the day in the vibration of this book, I couldn't quite fall asleep right away. I was just riding on that wave of inspiration. And I just felt such great gratitude for what it means to have the presence of these masters in our life and how the story of greatness that they're telling us, just as Christ says to us, everything I am, you are too, and more, that greatness that's expressed through these words and through this vibration, that greatness of divine consciousness, it's accessible for each one of us. It's our own greatness. And so in a way, it's a mirror or an echo or a shadow of that which we already are. That's a little bit esoteric in terms of what makes this book so great, all by way of saying I couldn't choose the greatest moments from the autobiography. And then I started thinking about just the contrast in this text and how there are these beautiful moments of esoteric conversation, things like the law of miracles and these concepts that with our human mind we can't quite grasp. You actually have to relax the logical aspect of the mind to really feel the energy behind that chapter, the law of miracles, which is talking about how this whole world is just a play of light and we can materialize and dematerialize because we understand that we are and we identify with ourselves as infinity. That's such a large concept to grasp, and it's esoteric in a sense. And I thought, wow, are these the greatest moments? Those moments that are so big that we just want to glom onto them and just hold them and read them, even if we can't understand them, but just hold our hearts open to that vibration. And then that's married or that's woven in with these powerfully human moments that Paramhansa Yogananda describes throughout his life, all the way from being a little child up through meeting his guru, his years in his master's hermitage, and then on what it meant to become a Swami himself and to find his own family. And then, of course, the very last line of the novel, or of the book, the autobiography, which is, you've given this monk a beautiful family, and how that energy just continues outward because discipleship to this great master, attunement to this great master, we're all part of this collective family when we're in attunement and when we're resonating in vibration with all of the great masters that we have. I have many of them. We're missing Christ, but we have many of the great masters with us today who are going to be sitting down for story time. And I brought the library chair out so that we can just sit back with a cup of tea and relax and just share in these beautiful stories of the autobiography of a yogi. Where I ultimately decided to start with today was not to look at those grandiose esoteric moments, but to really talk about those subtle personal moments when we get to connect in with the experience that Paramhansa Yogananda is having. One of the powerful gifts that the autobiography of a yogi gives us is that it helps us as truth seekers, as spiritual seekers, to understand and to observe the perfected state of spiritual qualities, but not through the lens of an avatar. Not that Paramhansa Yogananda, I'll come back to this, he was always in that consciousness of the perfected, of that perfect being of an avatar. But the stories are so human. They're stories that we can relate to and that we understand. He's mischievous, he's rebellious, he goes against his father's wishes and his guru's wishes. And, he asks, and we'll visit all of these moments, when he asks his guru, the last time that he sees him, to say, I love you. And he says, I know that you love me, but my human heart yearns or longs to hear it. There are moments that are so human for each one of us to relate to and understand. We all know what it means to drop the need of the ego and say, yes, I'm resonating with Divine Mother's love. It is all around me. But we also understand that human aspect of us that's just yearning for our beloved, our best friend, our teacher, our mentor, our partner to say, I love you. And to hear those words and to feel that vibration and that inspiration that comes from these feelings. And so what stood out as I was playing with Yogananda yesterday and thinking about the AY all week long was that one of the powerful gifts that this book has given us is that we are able to witness, as I said, that example of what these perfected states of, or what the perfection of these spiritual qualities, of certain spiritual qualities, actually looks like, in a way that we can also hold on to them for ourselves. They don't feel distanced from us. They're examples of what it looks like for us right now, where we're standing in our own human consciousness and the limitations of our own ego, to take our next step toward the divine, because that's ultimately what this book is all about. That's ultimately what the life of not only Yogananda, but every single one of these great masters who are here with us today and are here with us always, that's why they came. That's what the incarnation of an avatar is about. The incarnation of an avatar has one sole purpose: to help bring truth seekers home to the divine, to help each truth seeker, each sincere seeker, to take their next step toward divine consciousness, toward self-realization. And the power that comes from this novel, or from this book, The Autobiography of a Yogi, is that relationship with the guru in that human form. And it's important to notice, so as we're going through the course of this, one of the things that I was thinking about is that when an avatar takes on a human incarnation, they inherently have to play out and act out that pull of duality that exists as soon as we enter into the material world. That battle of Kurukshetra for each one of us involves and engages our ego. But even if we let go of the ego, simply by taking on a body and living in this material world, that pull of duality is present and it exists. So the great masters and the gurus come in order to teach us how to take our next step. And in the midst of that, they're playing along with us that pull of duality. And so where there is a capacity for human love, like Paramhansa Yogananda can express to his mother or to Sri Yukteswar, where that capacity for human love exists, there's also capacity for discord. Where there is a human body, there's also that capacity for, where there's the human body and the material body that we need to take care of, there's the desire to have food and to eat food, and along with that comes the love of mangoes. Or it's just that reality that what we're seeing, if we really plug into the sweet little details and nuances of Autobiography of a Yogi, is we see all of those human qualities and those human aspects. But it's important to remember that even though the avatar comes down and incarnates on this planet and acts out and plays out that divine Leela, is a part of that divine Leela, and that divine Leela, we often call it the divine play. And I just heard a friend who studied Sanskrit. This was just a few months ago. I discovered I was always reading divine play as in the divine drama. It's the divine play. But he said, no, Leela actually means to play. Leela is the act of playing. And when we consider that the avatars come down and they engage in that divine Leela, then all of the world becomes a playground. And in the midst of that, they're taking on those aspects of love, those aspects of desire, those aspects of enjoying mangoes, as I was talking about, all of these little details. And there's a part of them that is playing out that role in that human incarnation, but their consciousness is always merged with the divine. And so what we have in this book is that example of something that doesn't feel far away from us. It's not something that's esoteric. It's a mistake to think that Yogananda was ever actually lost in the desire for worldly material things. But even though his consciousness was always merged with the divine, the fact that we're here and we're hearing these stories and we're seeing these human aspects playing themselves out, it gives us something to hold on to and something to relate to even more personally. You know, the way that I was thinking about this, I just watched a little YouTube video the other day, and it was this, there was on the ground, there was like garbage that had been just destroyed, clearly by a pet. And then there was a line of 4 dogs. And the little caption said, who did it? And then it pans to the 4 dogs and the garbage on the ground. And there's this one dog who just kind of looks around, and then he takes his paw and he just puts his paw on the dog next to him. And then that dog turns to him and with his nose kind of like bumps him. And the whole time that this is happening, the caption's reading, he did it, he did it. And then it's reading, hey man. And the other dog kind of like bumps into him and says, don't tattle on me. And I sent this to my sister, and I'm a little embarrassed to admit this. I sent it to my sister and I said, look at how intelligent these dogs are. They're incredible. And I said, like, look at that. He called him out, and then the other dog, the other dog got angry. And she goes, yeah, I mean, she just ruined the magic right away. She goes, yeah, I wonder how long it took them to train them to do that. And I just wrote back to her, meaning that the dogs weren't actually, there was no consciousness happening there, that the dogs were actually just being trained to lift their paw and then to bump their noses against each other. And I just wrote back to her with a little laughing emoji, and I said, hey, don't kill the magic. These dogs knew exactly what they were doing. And it was that whole realization. I was caught up in it because I love dogs, and these were cute little puppies. And just for a minute, I got caught up in the drama, in the play, like, oh, this is real. This is what's actually happening. And she just kind of pulled me out of that delusion. And the analogy doesn't quite work because the delusion actually works the other way, where we wake up. In this case, the dogs were actually less intelligent than I was giving them credit for. In our case, that analogy actually switched, and as we wake ourselves up and we're pulled out of the delusion, we become more awake and more aware and more intelligent to the cosmic play that's happening around us. But somehow that story just came into my mind as I was reading the autobiography yesterday, and just looking at all of these stories about how Master is interacting with his family, and just the love that his family, the love that his father expressed for him over and over again, and just wanting to hold him close and not wanting him to leave. And then when he finally meets Sri Yukteswar, feeling so grateful, his father just bows in gratitude to Lahiri Mahashaya, who is, of course, his guru, and says, I'm so glad that your search for a divine guru hasn't taken you away from my sight. And then the moment when Yogananda realizes that he is being called to America, and he tells his father, and his father, in such a human way, says, well, how are you going to pay for it? And he said, Yogananda's response is, that the divine will take care of me. And then he kind of puts it out there, and perhaps you will feel inspired. And his father says, never. And then the next day he comes back with a check, and he says, I know that this is your path, and this is what you need to do. It's just those moments of such sweetness and the humanity in them. And that, I noticed throughout the book, Yogananda will refer to his father in terms of the title. He will say, father did this or father did that, but he never said my father. He always says my parent, which was an interesting thing, because it's that recognition. This is just the perfect, it's just a perfect example of kind of this esoteric point that I'm trying to express, which is that his consciousness was always merged with the divine. This isn't my father, this is my parent and the worldly play. I'm here in the world, in the material world, manifesting and playing out this role, and I am the earthly son of my parent. But he never says my father, because his consciousness is always existing up above. His consciousness is above the duality of this world. So he has to engage in it, but he's also always aware of that other reality. And it's not that those two are separate, they ultimately become merged. And the reason that I'm saying all of this for us is because, to come back to the analogy of this little dog story, the YouTube video that I watched, the world, what it looks like as we're going through the course of this book is that Yogananda, as little Mukunda, is making mistakes, is being rebellious, is getting angry. That Babaji, or Sri Yukteswar, when he's snuffed by Babaji, is actually angry and wants to stand back and doesn't. He ignores Babaji, the father, master of the universe, when he comes in the door. It looks like that's the reality. But the truth is that there's a duality there. Their consciousness is always merged in something much higher, which is the underlying vibration of the book. Everything I am, you are too. But these moments are so tender and so sweet because they speak directly to us. I know exactly what it feels like to be hurt by someone because you feel like you didn't get their attention and you didn't get their love, and the next time you see them, wanting to snuff them and kind of just walking past them and pretending you didn't see them and letting them feel how angry you are in those moments. That's such a perfectly human quality that exists in us. And so even though Sri Yukteswar, his consciousness can always be merged with that deeper knowing of union, of yoga, of union with the divine, these stories are here for us. They're a perfect gift for us to look at what it means to take ourselves step by step through that process of letting go of the ego. What it means to feel that hurt and that resentment, but then to know that that's not the truth and to be able to let it go. To know the pain of losing your earthly mother, an earthly beloved, friend, mother, partner, whomever it is, but then to also feel that resonance and that reality of exactly what the Divine Mother says to Mukunda in that state of just despair at the loss of his earthly mother. I am the mother who has always watched over you, lifetime after lifetime. That duality of consciousness, it's also ours already. And these stories help to just pull back the veil piece by piece, to unweave the thread of our own ego consciousness, which tells us that things are separate, which tells us that when a loved one is lost, they're gone, which tells us that when we are snuffed or ignored or hurt by someone, that we have to punch back. All of those threads of ego that just seamlessly weave their way into our habits, into our thoughts, into the heart's desire. What we see story after story in the Autobiography of a Yogi is ways that we too can begin to pull that thread, to pull back that veil. And so this was a long introduction to the greatest moments of the Autobiography of a Yogi. What I realized last night, and the path that I would like to take us on for the next hour and 40 minutes, is to not look at those grandiose moments, though some of them will come through, but to not look at the esoteric moments of the grandeur of what it means to be a yogi and pull our energy and step out onto the battlefield with vigor and power and courage. All of that's important, but today we're going to visit those smaller moments, those individual human moments where we watch as each of our great teachers takes us through example, through observation, through our own identification with the stories, one step closer to being in union with the divine, to being merged in towards self-realization is really what I want to say. And so that's the greatest moments that we'll explore. And the way that we're going to do that is to weave through 5 different spiritual qualities that we'll talk about. Of course, there are many spiritual qualities that are displayed, and in some cases there were stories that just had to make their way in, and so you might have to use your imagination a bit and say, is that really willpower, or could it also be devotion? Could it maybe be this? I just wanted to create a context around what are 5 spiritual qualities that each one of us are working on, wherever we're standing right now on our own path. And how are the stories that exist in the Autobiography of a Yogi there to help support us as we progress, as we learn from these, as we learn to step more deeply into each of these qualities, as we learn to step more deeply onto the path. And those 5 spiritual qualities that we'll explore are: willpower, what it means to use our willpower. And right attitude and willingness. So once we have our willpower and we're committed onto the spiritual path, what does it mean to use right attitude and to have willingness, that say yes to life mentality? And then discipline. Once we have the willingness and the willpower, we have to discipline ourselves. And this was a beautiful example that we see in Paramhansa Yogananda, who had this I don't want to use the term, I'm getting caught up because I don't want to use the term emotional, though sometimes it could manifest that way, but just this heart-wrenching love for Divine Mother, this deep yearning that would just spill out almost in illogical ways where he would rebel or fly. He would do anything to get to his Divine Mother. And then he meets Sri Yukteswar, who teaches discipline. So he takes that wily devotion of the heart and he offers discipline and he offers habit and he offers that opportunity to learn to control and contain that wily devotion of the heart. So first we awaken devotion and then we have to discipline that devotion. And once we've worked through our willpower, our willingness, our devotion, our discipline, we enter into those stages of faith and receptivity, and then ultimately of devotion and yearning and love. And so that's the path that we'll explore today as we go through several stories from Autobiography. Keshava is with us today. He's behind the camera right now, but he's going to step up in just a moment. And as we begin each section of a spiritual quality, he'll lead us through a chant and just a brief moment of meditation to help to center us into the spirit of that spiritual quality. So he'll come up and join us now.
To begin, let's start with the chant, the hymn to Brahma, which Yogananda said was specifically to invoke the grace and the benedictions of the Guru. And what an appropriate chant to begin with as we dive into this experience of autobiography of a yogi. Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Gurudeva Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Brahmanandam Paramasukaram, Kevalam Jnanamurtim Dandvatitam, Gagana Sadrisham Tattvamasya Dilakshyam, Ekam Nityam Vimalamachalam, Sarvade Sakshibhutam Bhavatitam, Trigunarahitam, Sadgurum Dham full of bliss, giving joy transcendent, of higher knowledge the abode, dual no more, clear as the heavens, known to all as thou art that. He is pure, permanent, unmoving, the everlasting seer of all, far, far beyond qualities and thought. Guru Lord, I bow to thee. Guru Lord, I bow to thee. Tvameva matai japit Tvameva bandhu chasakha tvameva Tvameva vidyam brahminam tvameva Tvameva sarvam amodeva deva Thou art my mother, my father, thou art my brother, my friend, thou art my wisdom, my wealth, thou art my all, light of lights art thou art my mother, my father, thou art my brother, my friend, thou art my wisdom, my wealth, thou art my all, light of lights art thou art my all, light of lights art thou.
As Keshava was chanting hymn to Brahma, I was sitting here just thinking, that's it. What else needs to be said? Just the call to the Guru, the call to that divine consciousness, that divine aspect. That's the essence of where we're headed, and each spiritual quality that we are enacting, each spiritual quality that we are working to perfect along the road. It's all leading us to that one place where we surrender, full of bliss, giving joy transcendent, higher knowledge, the abode, here over and over again, just hearing, do all no more, clear as the heavens, known to all as thou art that state of knowing, union, of knowing where our consciousness truly lies and what our true experience is. That's the road of surrender. That's the road towards surrender that we take with each of these spiritual qualities, and we have to work with them. It's like a juggling act, but instead of 3 little balls or 3 little bowling pins, we have hundreds, maybe thousands of bowling pins that we're tossing up in the air all at once. It is that divine juggling act. But here we are in the midst of God's Leela, in the midst of God's play, not his drama, his play, his playground. And the masters, they knew that, and that spirit of play, it's woven so beautifully into Autobiography of a Yogi. Of course, that's running parallel or weaving also through with the deep knowing and that deep sense of devotion, which is what is articulated so beautifully through the vibration of the chant that Keshava just shared with us. This first quality of willpower, I sat with it for quite a while last night thinking, is this the right quality? to be sharing about today, but it came along with such sweet stories, and I wanted to begin by looking at this dual expression of what it means to have the masters come down and live out their human existence and their human lives. And we hear so much from the first few chapters of the autobiography about what it was like to be little Mukunda. It reminds me so much, and you can feel all the parallels of just sweet little Krishna, always kind of being mischievous and playing tricks. But the spirit of that mischief, and the spirit, in this case, of what I would call Yogananda's rebelliousness, or Mukunda's rebellion, and rebelliousness as a little child, it had nothing to do with the ego. And so that's where the parallel comes from. The stories between sweet Krishna and little Mukunda are very different. The actual experiences are different. The essence and the vibration beneath them is the same. And that quality that in the human form can manifest as and look like rebellion. It's actually, and particularly in Yogananda's case, the experience of willpower, using his willpower to move toward the divine. There was a relentlessness in his search for the divine. No matter what was happening in this world, he knew, or in his life, in his circumstances, he knew that his goal and that his purpose for being was to renounce worldly materialism. And so the first thing that came to mind in thinking about willpower and thinking about this rebelliousness and the little mischievous, the mischief of little Mukunda, of our young Mukunda, are, of course, our 3 flights to the Himalayas. And the first one happens right after Mukunda's mother dies, right after Yogananda's mother passes away, and just distraught and overwhelmed with the pain of losing his earthly mother, he determines that he's going to flee to the Himalayas in search of Divine Mother. He's stopped very quickly. His brother Ananda brings him back, and in response to that, he says, my heart wept for the lost mothers, human and divine. And so in the midst of that first flight, we don't hear much about it because I always imagine not much happens. I imagine just the sweet little Mukunda who's just ready to head off, kind of like the child who's running away from home, and they're in their bedroom packing up their belongings, and their mother says, "What are you doing?" And you go, "I'm running away from home." "Okay, do you need any help?" "Yes, can you help me pack?" Just that sort of sweetness where there was such a desire and a yearning to flee to the Himalayas, but he didn't get very far before it was time to turn around and come back. And this was the first, what he learns in this experience, what he tells us is that he began to visit the altar of, he found the altar within himself, and that altar of Divine Mother within himself. And he would go every day and pray and meditate under the tree in remembrance of his mother and in that emergence of the Divine Mother. And we'll talk a little bit more about that story of what he hears and what he feels from Divine Mother in the aftermath of his earthly mother's death. And then the second the second flight off to the Himalayas happens when he's a little bit older, and he's a little more successful in this one. So he and 2 of his fellow friends pack up, they create their whole plan. They order the carriage, he throws his sack out the window and rushes out the door. His uncle says, "Where are you going in such a hurry?" And he just gives a little mischievous smile and runs off, and they change their clothes and they give away their shoes to the carriage driver, and they head off to the Himalayas. And of course, we know this story. They get caught. One of their first travel mate gets cold feet, and he turns around and heads home right away. So then now we're just 2, and they get caught in the train station. And the officer asks them, "Are you running away in anger?" And Yogananda, he's delighted at the fact that he gets to say no with such affirmation, because he's not running away in anger, but of course he wants to be truthful. He tells not Jatinda, Jatinda, "I won't lie. I won't lie." And Jatinda says, "Don't worry, let me do all of the talking." And so here they are, and he goes on, and the officer says, "Where's the 3rd boy?" And Jatinda's going, "Well, you can see, obviously, we are just 2 boys." And he goes on and orchestrates this whole story, and they get a little bit further until they're ultimately delayed. And what was so sweet in the midst of that story is that right after that moment where Yogananda can proclaim, no, I'm not running away in anger, he goes on to say, no, not in anger, but in divine melancholy. And so there's our second flight. He gets a little bit further, but he's ultimately turned around, and he has to return, and he has to come back. And the gift that Divine Mother offers him after this second flight, the second attempt to find her in the Himalayan caves, in the Himalayan mountains, in the Himalayan caves, is that his father, organizes for him to start working with Swami Kevalananda. And he is brought in as a Sanskrit tutor, but I always love, he says, I didn't really learn much Sanskrit from this great teacher, but I learned the divine syntax. And so you can see in each of them, in the first flight, even though it appears outwardly as that rebellion, it's actually the willpower, the yearning, the need to be with Divine Mother, and to, with all of our strength, right? Willpower is our energy and our desire. It's focusing on whatever that outward goal is. And for little Mukunda, that outward goal is union with the divine. It's that wholehearted yearning to know God. And so with each of these flights, even though there's a little element of worldly mischief and worldly rebellion in it, it's actually ultimately just that. It's worldly rebellion. It's rebellion against the worldly the materialism of the world, something that his brother Ananta, I was so grateful for Ananta in the midst of reading this text yesterday, because Ananta represents over and over again just that part of us, that little voice of ego that's coming in and cutting in and saying, yeah, you want to seek the divine, but aren't you tired? Don't you also just want to turn on Netflix and relax a little bit tonight? You've worked really hard. You know, I could hear that voice telling myself that last night at about 10:30. I was finally kind of done and packing up and putting things away for the day, and I said I'll get back to it and meditate on it more in the morning. And that little voice came in and said, well, you worked really hard all day. Don't you think you should just watch a little show and just relax a little bit? And I said, no. You know, that Ananta kind of brings in that worldly perspective for each one of us. And, you know, when we get to two penniless boys in Brindaban, the conversation between them is, Ananta says, money first, God later, life could be too long. And Yogananda's response is, God first, money is her slave. Life may be too short. And so Ananta's always bringing in, what I felt in him is I felt gratitude for that part of me that always wants to come in and interject and say, yeah, but I know I'm supposed to, but shouldn't I just? And then we have that juxtaposition of Yogananda, who represents that other aspect that exists within us, which is no, you know, money and God first. Money is her slave. Life may be too short. Run home, Raghu, race home toward the divine. And that's what we see in each of these flights. And as a result of that heart's yearning, the contrast to that is Divine Mother offers him a gift. The first time, it's that voice of Divine Mother saying, I am your mother. I've been your mother for incarnations. Feel that love, hold that love in me. In the second, hold that trust in me. In the second one, it's the opportunity to study with this great teacher and to learn the divine syntax. And then our third flight, which happens to be one of my favorites because it's just, to me, it really represents that moment of complete surrender, is when he asks, when Mukunda or Yogananda asks Sri Yukteswar, so this is after he's met his guru and he's living in the ashram, if he can go to the Himalayas. And Sri Yukteswar just doesn't say anything. And the response that Yogananda gives is, I took that silence as, what's the word? As a yes, I'm forgetting the word, but just as a yes, go for it, as consent. That's the word I was looking for. And he flees off to the Himalayas, and he goes in search of the saint or the sadhu Ram Gopal. And I love this story because in the midst of searching for Ram Gopal, first he comes to, let me make sure I get the name, Tarkeshwar. He comes to the temple at Tarkeshwar, and there's this big, beautiful cylinder-shaped, circular-shaped stone on the altar. And he has this fleeting thought, Yogananda or Mukunda has this fleeting thought, seek God within, and he chooses not to bow at the altar of the temple. And then he's set off on, he's saying, seek God within, meaning I shouldn't have to bow to outward idols, or I'm not going to bow to outward idols. I should be seeking God inside. Sort of that, I'm going to use the word arrogance, but again, I use all of these words cautiously. Of course, there's that other aspect of the avatar who is not arrogant, who knows exactly what truth is and is holding on to that consciousness at all times. But again, they're enjoying the divine Leela, the divine drama with us. They're playing with God throughout the midst of that. And what I felt in that is just that arrogance that sometimes comes up for us, which is, well, I know the path to God. I know what's right. I'm the one who, inside my own heart, inside my own mind, I know how to worship the divine. I don't need these outward, whatever they may be, rituals, sacred initiations, whatever it may be. I don't need that God is within. There's that little part of arrogance in us that thinks, I can do this on my own. And then he goes on and he's sent off on this circuitous route. The first day, as he goes in search of Ram Gopal, he is misdirected, and the passerby tells him to go left when he's supposed to go right. And then the next day, when he's kind of set on the right path finally, he keeps passing people along the path who are saying, I forget what it is in the book, but who just keeps saying, it's just 2 more miles. It's just 2 more miles. It's just 2 more miles. And he's getting more and more frustrated. And he says by hour 6, he is, he's really frustrated. And this person comes up next to him and says, did you think it would be easy to find me? And it's Ram Gopal. And Ram Gopal goes on to ask him, why didn't you bow at the altar in Tarkeshwar? And then they go on to have a beautiful, spiritually uplifting conversation. But what I took from this, one of the last things that Ram Gopal says to him is, as soon as the devotee is willing to go to the ends of the earth for spiritual enlightenment, the guru appears nearby. And it was just that recognition that what our willpower means for each one of us, when we have had the great blessing to magnetize the guru to us, it is then our obligation and our responsibility and our great opportunity and privilege to direct all of our willpower at attunement to the guru. And here is Yogananda, who has met his guru, but still that fleeting thought exists, I need to be in the Himalayas. That's where I'm going to find God. And what happens? He's sent off on this circuitous route where there are missteps along the way. And for us, those missteps may be incarnations. For him, it happens to be 2 days. But the first thing is that just fleeting thought of, I don't need to seek in the outward rituals. God exists within me. I don't need to bow at this altar. God exists within me only. And then the second, because that's the exact line, to read the exact line he uses. Did I write it? God should be sought, so he says, my own mood at the moment was so austere that I felt disinclined to bow before the stone symbol. God should be sought, I reflected, only within the soul. And it's that feeling that we have, the words themselves are not wrong, but the attitude and the mentality is the lack of recognition that God is everywhere, that we can bow to the divine in any moment, in anything. And so that's the first little fleeting thought that brings up just a bit of arrogance that turns him off in the wrong direction. And then here he is, he's misdirected. Go left when you should be going right. When we have the guru and we don't listen to the guru's teachings, how often does that happen for us? The guru's saying go left and we turn right. Or we're misdirected and we say, I don't need to be attuned to the guru. I don't need to meditate tonight. I can watch a movie instead. And then what happens? We have weird dreams. We feel lethargic. The next morning, we don't quite want to wake up and energize and meditate. So just a little twist and turn, or we can go really off. And then, as I said, it can take us incarnations to find our way back. And then that third part of the story where he's finally set on the right path, but then everyone keeps saying to him, just 2 more miles, just 2 more miles, that feeling that we can just never quite get there. Why is that? Because without the guru, we can't get there. Without the guru, we can't find God in that way. We need the guru to help pull us out of that delusion. And so in this one story, this one flight to the Himalayas, where he realizes that what he was seeking could be found in his guru back at home, which is exactly what Ram Gopal says to him in this story. He says, you don't need the mountain caves. He says, do you have a place where you can close the door and meditate? And Mukunda says, yes. And he says, those are your mountain caves. That is where you will find the kingdom of God. You have a self-realized guru who can show you God. And as a result of that, he's set off on the right path, and he returns to his guru, and he comes and he bows at his guru's feet. It's the willingness, once we have had the great blessing to magnetize the guru to us, then we give everything that we are, all of our energy, all of our willpower into the divine. And if we don't, if we have just a fleeting thought or our energy just pulls us off a little bit, we just get told to go left instead of right. And the more we pull ourselves off, that left becomes a little bit longer. Maybe it becomes a U-turn, and on and on. And ultimately, it's that realization that nothing outside of us is going to help us to find God. We don't need the Himalayan caves in order to find the divine. That willingness exists within us. And when we find our guru is the one who's going to take us step by step. You know, when I was reading the story last night, and thinking about just what that experience would be like to be off on this Himalayan road, this dirt path, and everyone's just saying, it's 2 more miles, it's 2 more miles. And he's saying it's hot and the sun is at its zenith and he's tired and he's frustrated and you're just never quite getting there. It reminded me of, and I know I couldn't quite pull up the talk that Swami Kriyananda referenced this in, but I know he references it somewhere, Zeno's paradox, which is this idea that if you are crossing the street, but first you have to go halfway of the full length of the street, and then you have to take half of that, and then half of that, and half of that, and half of that. If you keep cutting things in half and half and half, then ultimately you're never going to get to your destination. And I don't quite understand philosophically why we pondered this paradox, because it seemed logical to me. But anyway, that's the thought that came into my mind. And when I Googled it last night, one of the sentences that came up was that this description requires one to complete an infinite number of tasks, which Zeno maintains as an impossibility. And I was just thinking it in that way, that if we always have to, you know, again, the paradox being, if I want to cross the street, but first I have to cut myself in half, and then I have to cut that in half, and that in half, and that in half, and that in half. What he's saying is that it's ultimately always needing to cut the task in half, or to cut the length in half, means that you'll have an infinite number of tasks, and that's an impossibility. And in a certain way, it reminded me so much of our own karma, and how we are taught, and Yogananda teaches us, that if we try and just sever the heartstring of every single individual desire, we're never going to get there. But when we hitch our wagon to the guru, when we merge our consciousness with the guru, and we surrender ourselves, and we offer our willpower and our energy, remember, willpower is energy and desire focused toward that goal being divine consciousness. When we are willing to give all of our energy and effort toward the teachings that the guru is asking of us, toward that which the guru asks of us, then we don't have to keep inevitably cutting it in half and half and half and half. We don't have to keep inevitably cutting each of those individual heartstrings, because then pours in divine grace, then pours in Kriya Yoga, then pours in tools and techniques that we can use to start to shift our energy and to shift our consciousness, and it's a great blessing. And so, of course, at the end of this, Ram Gopal says to Yogananda, go home and be with your guru. He is the one who will bring you divine consciousness. And of course, the very next chapter, which we'll talk about this story later, is an experience in cosmic consciousness. So in learning this lesson, in having to, it's such a sweet story to me, because again, what can take us incarnations if we get off on the wrong path and go left instead of right? Just the sweetness of that story. It was only a day and a half or 2 days that Yogananda was just turned around a little bit, but then he was able to realize, it is my guru. It's nothing outside. It's not the Himalayan caves. It's not, I just had the thought the other day that my meditations, I've just been feeling a little scattered in them lately, and I thought I need to get a piece of a nice wool blanket, and I have to get a really nice, like an expensive, pretty nice wool blanket because it has to be a really good one, and then my meditations are going to get better. And just these little things I was thinking in my mind. It's that idea, if I could just get my meditation set up right, then my meditations are going to be great. Or it's that idea, here we are, we're coming up on the end of the year, so New Year's resolutions are around the corner. And how many times have I heard my friends say, oh yeah, I'm going to start a new exercise regimen, so I'm going to go out and buy new exercise clothes, because if I look good in my clothes, if I love the clothes I'm wearing, then I'll exercise more. And suddenly we just start wearing running pants everywhere, but we're not actually running. And so there's this idea that we get caught up in our minds that something outside of us is going to help fix that issue, is going to help us to get closer to the divine. It is ultimately through the guru that we find the divine, and that opportunity to merge our energy and our willingness with the divine is, let me rephrase that. I was checking my notes to make sure I didn't miss a story. When we are prepared to surrender our ego and offer our willpower to the divine is there and ready to offer herself back. So in the first story, the first flight toward the Himalayas, Divine Mother responds to that gift of that longing and that yearning that he has to know God. The Divine Mother responds with that gift of, I am your mother, I have always been your mother, and that reassurance and that love and that comfort that small Mukunda needs in the aftermath, or once in the aftermath of his earthly mother's death. In the second longing and yearning that he has to know God, he's given a tutor and a mentor who is going to help him get closer to the divine and to learn the divine syntax. And in the third flight, in that third story, he's returned to the feet of his guru, and Divine Mother gives him the gift of experiencing cosmic consciousness. When we merge our willpower, so what appeared as outward rebellion, going against the wishes of his father, his brother, and even his guru in the end, what appears as outward rebellion, because it wasn't grounded in ego, but was grounded in that desire to know God, God responds back to him in each of these experiences. And so for each one of us, when we are employing our own willpower, the question is always, what am I directing my energy toward? Is this bringing me closer to the divine? And then the divine will inevitably and inherently respond back to us. So that's our first quality. Our second quality, which Keshava is going to come up and begin with a chant again, just so we can rest in that vibration. Our second quality is going to be right attitude and willingness, meaning saying yes.
This is Saint Teresa of Avila's admonition. Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you. All things will pass, but God changes not. God alone, God alone. Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you. All things will pass, but God changes not. Patient endurance brings you to victory. Once you have God, you'll want nothing more. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you. All things will pass, but God changes not. Patient endurance brings you to victory. Once you have God, you'll want nothing more. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you. All things will pass, but God changes not. Patient endurance brings you to victory. Once you have God, you'll want nothing more. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you. All things will pass, but God changes not. Patient endurance brings you to victory. Once you have God, you'll want nothing more. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you. All things will pass, but God changes not. Patient endurance brings you to victory. Once you have God, you'll want nothing more. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need.
Okay. Last night I called Keshava, who had signed on to be my tech support today, and I said, "Hey, can I give you 5 spiritual qualities, and will you choose chants to go along with them?" And he, of course, ever willingly said yes. And I was just sitting here. Of course, it's the nature of his attunement and just the nature of feeling the vibration of attunement in general. That the chant that he chose, I don't know what chants are coming. It's a fun surprise for me as well. And that chant just so perfectly encompasses the spirit of right attitude and the spirit of willingness that we see portrayed through some of the stories in Autobiography of a Yogi. When I think about willingness and right attitude, right attitude it's really quite foundational for the spiritual seeker and for the devotee on the path, because without right attitude, everything else kind of falls away. We can be brazen and say meditation is the most important thing, but without right attitude, our meditations, they get a little stale and dry. Or seva in right action and being serviceful is the most important thing, but without right attitude, the act of seva becomes vacant, it becomes vapid if we're not actually being serviceful in our attitude and in our intention and our devotion. And so right attitude, it's really foundational. It's a wellspring that we are pulling from constantly whenever we examine so many of these branches of the spiritual life and the spiritual path that we are that we're all participating in and embarking on. And it really is no different for Yogananda and some of the experiences that he tells us about in the midst of the Autobiography of a Yogi and this chant, let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you, all things will pass, but God changes not. That is the essence of right attitude, recognizing and understanding that this world is all God's creation, and that everything that's happening to us, the trials as well as the tribulations, as well as these successes and the accomplishments, they're all here to help us to grow, and they're all a gift from the divine. I believe it was Swami Kriyananda, but I may have that wrong, who talked about just imagining that every single thing that comes to you in your life is just perfectly and beautifully gift wrapped and handed to you by Divine Mother. And it's a powerful thing to meditate on and to think about or reflect upon and introspect upon. Can I really look at every circumstance in my life and imagine it to be a perfectly gift-wrapped Divine Mother gift? That this is here and it's given with all of the love and support of our Divine Mother, of that one of our beloved. And at times that can feel easy, but then when the challenges are up, when the battlefield of life is raging, that can feel a lot more difficult. And that's when we can lean on right attitude and our willingness, our say yes to life. Sister Gyanamata, say yes and make it snappy. This ability to just flow through with that positivity and that optimism in the midst of challenge and in the midst of struggle. That's what holds the concept of right attitude. And so to come back to the chant, let nothing disturb you and let nothing affright you, when we are living in that space of recognizing and knowing that Divine Mother's got us. She's with us no matter what, then we can work toward standing up to the face of those challenges and standing up in the midst of the battlefield of life and those obstacles that life throws at us. And a story that came to mind when I started thinking about how to really foundationally talk about the importance of right attitude is the moment when Yogananda he goes to see a biospect, a movie with Master Mahashaya, and at the end of it, there were all kinds of things that went awry in the midst of the movie, and Lahiri Mahashaya turns to him. I said Master Mahashaya, but I meant Lahiri Mahashaya. Lahiri turns to him at the end and says, "Oh, I see you didn't enjoy that biospec." And he just taps him on the heart. And suddenly, Yogananda, it's not quite the same experience as what happens when Swami Sri Yukteswar gives him that experience of cosmic consciousness. This isn't quite the experience of samadhi, but it's what he describes experiencing is just the play of light and shadows that makes up this world, as though the world itself is a movie film, that the world itself is made up of those same aspects. Of course, we know the metaphor that Yogananda uses later in the Autobiography, that life is just like a film, and if you look back up at the top of the film, you can see that it's all just being created from that play of light. So no matter what it is that you're seeing or experiencing when you're watching that film, it's all just coming from a play of light and shadows. And he has this experience of just seeing, like he says at one point, Mukunda is saying that at one point his friends are walking towards him and they just sort of walk right through him. They don't see him. So he's just witnessing and experiencing this play of cosmic consciousness that exists. And the reason that I felt that fit well as a foundational story or foundational experience to set the tone of right attitude is because that's what we have to understand, just like the chant that Keshava shared with us. That knowing, let nothing disturb you, let nothing affright you, all things will pass, but God changes not. Patience, endurance brings us to victory. Once we have God, we want nothing more, God alone. That's the same experience of recognizing and acknowledging that this world is a divine drama, that this world is just a biospec. Am I saying that word right? Yeah, biospec. It was a word I hadn't heard in a very long time. That everything is just a play of light and shadows. Because when we can live in the resonance of that truth, to whatever extent we are able to just dip our toe in that resonance of truth, dip our toe in that resonance of divine consciousness, then the assaults that happen in our lives, those things that come at us and assault us emotionally, literally, the challenges and obstacles and circumstances that we face, they become less threatening, you know. Today is Halloween. I didn't even acknowledge that today is Halloween. Happy Halloween, everybody. I was thinking, this is tangential, but I know exactly where I left off. I'm putting a pin in it. I was thinking this morning, the thought to dress up for Halloween was never even a consideration in my mind. But I thought this morning, oh, it's Halloween. Maybe we should all dress up and we can come and sip our tea in our costumes. And then I thought, we're all just wearing our costumes. I'm wearing the costume of Lakshmi. Kesava's wearing the costume of Kesava. We're all just in our costumes all the time, because underneath the mask of this ego identification is just divine consciousness. So we're all in costume at any rate. I said I remembered. Oh yeah, I do. And so to pull that pin back out, when we can begin to relate to that reality that the world is simply a play of light and shadows, that this world is just a biospec, it's just a film that we're watching and participating in, or to maybe get even more visceral in that the world is a drama and we are just the actors in it, but that at the end of that, we can let that go. At the end of that play, at the end of this life, we can let those go. It makes the assaults and the things that are happening in our lives less threatening. That's what I was saying. And I was talking with my students. Now I remember where I left off. I'm a high school English teacher along with serving at the Sangha. And I was talking with my students about what they're going to do for Halloween this weekend. And because of our current circumstances and the global pandemic, just options are limited. And a lot of them were talking about just having movie marathons of horror movies and scary movies. And they were asking if I watch scary movies. And I said, no, I never liked scary movies, even when I was younger or before I found this path. They scare me. I never liked them. I never sat well with them afterward. I would always be up sometimes for a couple of days or have to sleep with a light on in the other room because they scared me. I didn't like them. And so I was saying that because even with the acknowledgement that this world is a biospec, and even that experience that Mukunda has of recognizing that this world is just that play of light and shadows, it doesn't mean that it can't feel real to us. So watching a scary movie for me, I can understand that it's there and it's on the screen and there's no literal threat to me in this moment, but it unsettles me, and it unsettles me vibrationally and emotionally. And so that experience, there's a resonance of that's real, and that's on an even larger scale for us when we're actually the actors and the players in the drama that are playing along with it. And yet, even the ability to recognize it, even the ability to ask the question, who is it that's saddened by this experience? Who is it that's fearful in this moment? Even being able to ask that question, it just gives us that one step back where we can look down with that impersonal gaze on the circumstances of our life. And we can maybe begin to build toward that acceptance and recognition that everything Divine Mother gives us is a gift. One thing that I used to love watching, there used to be this show called Inside the Actor's Studio with James Lipton, and he would every week, he would interview, or maybe it was every other week, he would interview famous actors, really high quality, well-known, prolific actors, and just ask them many questions about their career, about what it was like to be an actor, about particularly famous parts that they may play or films that they participated in. And I loved this show. I never wanted to be an actor. No part of me wants to be up on stage. But I always was intrigued by the world of Hollywood. I thought I was going to, after college, after high school, I thought my route would be to go to film school, and I wanted to study screenwriting, and I wanted to become a screenwriter. I thought that was the path that I was headed on. And then Master had other plans for me, for which I'm very grateful. But I always loved the world of Hollywood, and I always loved the world of film making because I loved the idea of creating these completely immersive worlds where you can play out all of these scenes and these scenarios, and you just become completely immersed in them, in the creation of them, and then you get to walk away from them and do it again in a different scenario. And so many actors, when I would watch this show inside the actor's studio, this interview show, that's what they would talk about, the experience of what it was like to be so completely immersed in a character, and often a character that maybe was so different than the person that they truly felt to be. And just that experience of how almost feeling at times like that sense of losing yourself in the midst of it, but then the show being over or the film being completed, and then refinding themselves at the end. And I just thought about how for each one of us, that's what happens, especially when life's battlefield is raging. We lose ourselves in the story, in what's happening. But right attitude, developing the attitudes of perseverance, of compassion, of self-study, of introspection, any of these actual right attitudes that we could talk about, in essence, they're all umbrellaed under that knowing that we are simply actors on a stage. To quote Shakespeare, all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players, right? I mean, there's a perceptive quality to what he said there, which we can take away and pull out for its divine or its spiritual lesson, its spiritual seeds that exist beneath that. And this to me is the essence of right attitude. And there are other examples, and I'll run through a few of them quickly. I realize we're running out of time. We might not make it to all 5, so if we have to skip right to devotion, we will. There are other examples from the autobiography that stood out. And these are little known stories. I really found myself being drawn, not to the greatest moments, but to the stories that we don't often hear and we don't often tell. I was thinking about the story of, I hope I'm going to say the name correctly. You can correct me if I don't. But Apoya, who is pregnant with her 9th child, and she implores Lahiri Mahashaya to she's lost 8 of her 9 children in childbirth. And she implores the blessing of Lahiri Mahashaya. And Lahiri Mahashaya says, keep this oil lamp burning all night long, and your child will be well. On the day that she's having, in the day, I believe it's right after the birth of the child. And so diligently they go home with all of their effort and energy and all of their willingness. Yes, of course, we can keep the oil lamp burning. And they start to get a little bit sleepy and a little bit sleepier. And then they fall asleep. And just when the oil lamp is about to burn out, Lahiri Mahashaya appears and says, look, the oil lamp is almost out. And they refill it. And then the child goes on to live a happy, healthy life. And my first thought immediately, just to draw the parallel, was to the night before Christ's crucifixion, when he goes off to pray on his own, but he says to his disciples, stay up and pray with me all night. And he comes back and he finds them all sleeping, and he gently wakes them up again. And with just all of the compassion in the world, understands the weakness of the flesh, right? I think it's Peter who responds, I'm going to paraphrase it, but the heart or the mind is willing, but the flesh is weak. And that's what I felt in this story. And the reason it links in with right attitude is because right attitude helps us to overcome the weaknesses of the flesh, the ties or the desires or the attachments that keep us linked to our sense desires, that keeps us from saying, I can't do that. I can't sit up and meditate for another hour. I have to go to bed. No, you don't. You are energy, right? Which is exactly what Lahiri can say in this moment. All of the right intention, here it is to keep your child safe and to keep her well. All we have to do is keep the oil lamp burning, and yet perhaps we fall asleep. But what does it mean to have right attitude? It means to understand and to own that these weaknesses of the flesh, again to paraphrase from the Bible, that we don't have to own them and claim them as our own. There are so many other stories. Another one that came up to mind, and of course these are 2 of my favorite stories from the Autobiography of a Yogi, are the lessons that Paramhansa Yogananda learns from Sri Yukteswar, both dealing with the mosquitoes. So we know our 2 stories, the first one being that when he comes to live at the ashram, there are mosquitoes everywhere, and he recognizes that at first they aren't using mosquito nets while they're sleeping. And so he's sleeping next to his guru, and he's just getting bitten up by mosquitoes all night long. And his guru takes pity on him and says, go ahead and buy 2 nets, mosquito nets, one for you and one for me. And then one night, Sri Yukteswar is meditating, and Yogananda's preparing himself for bed, and he's kind of waiting for Sri Yukteswar to say, prepare the mosquito nets, and he doesn't say anything. And he, it's the first time that he witnesses, it's a significant story because it's also the first time that he witnesses his guru in samadhi, and he goes up, and it's where he's putting the mirror under his nose, and he's plugging his nose to see if breath will flow. And he wakes up, Sri Yukteswar wakes up, and he laughs, and he calls Yogananda a budding scientist, and he says, my poor nose. Then he goes on after laughing, and he says, what are you waiting up for? Rid yourself of mosquito consciousness. And in that moment, with the willpower and with that attitude of recognizing that he does not have to be, that the soul is not at the mercy of the weaknesses of the flesh, of the weaknesses of the material plane and the burdens and obstacles that come along with it. From that moment on, he doesn't need the mosquito nets anymore. And he was able, what Yogananda, or what Sri Yukteswar says is, what are you waiting for? The world is not going to change for you. You must change. Rid yourself of mosquito consciousness. And that's right attitude, because just as Hoya and the oil lamp, and recognizing you are energy, you don't need to fall asleep. You don't need to fall victim to the weaknesses of the flesh. Here is Yogananda, again, with that same attitude and that same consciousness with his willpower. Rid yourself of mosquito consciousness. You do not have to fall victim to the irks and disturbances of the material plane. And the second mosquito story, which comes right after that in the autobiography, is when Yogananda is quietly listening to his guru's talk on the scriptures, and a mosquito lands on his arm, and he raises his arm in preparation to slap it off, and he thinks better of it, and he stops, and he puts his hand back down, and Sri Yukteswar stops him, and he says, why don't you finish the job? And Mukunda is shocked, Yogananda is shocked, and he says, sir, you advocate taking lives? And Sri Yukteswar says, no, but the death blow was already instated, or the death blow was already, I forget the exact word he used, but was already enacted when you had the thought. And he goes on to talk about Patanjali and how ahimsa was ridding ourselves of the intention to do harm, not actually ridding ourselves of the act of harm. He says this world is not nicely, or it's not conveniently designed for a practical application of ahimsa. But the lesson in that behind it, for us in terms of right attitude, is that we have the option to choose our reaction, that we can choose, and Yogananda goes on to reflect that what Sri Yukteswar taught him in that moment is we don't have to choose anger, we don't have to choose violence, that we have that option, and sometimes it doesn't feel that way. You know, I just had an experience yesterday where I got so angry about something, and I could feel it. I mean, you know that feeling in you when the anger kind of boils up. It's visceral, and it comes up, and you can feel it. Kind of your whole body get tense, and I could feel it just wanting to like get out, whether it was a yell or a whatever it would be. And I just decided, I stopped, and I immediately just sat back down on the couch, and I just breathed into my third chakra, and I just said, I just imagined, the chakra, the lotus flower opening, and just allowing that energy to flow up. And so it didn't need to go out anywhere, that I could transmute it in that moment. That's not quite perfected to the extent of not experiencing anger, but it's a step in that direction. And with right attitude, we have that opportunity, because again, right attitude, I'm umbrellaing that under that recognition that to work, to practice endurance or patience or perseverance or compassion, any of these qualities that are right attitude or that are examples of right attitude, we can umbrella all of that under the knowing that this world is not what it seems, and that we can control the sensory, the hamster wheel that keeps us locked to the sense telephones, that we can control the emotional responses, because this world is a play of light and shadows. It's happening through us. It's happening so that there are lessons that we can learn along the way. The Divine Mother is wrapping in a bow and handing to each one of us. And walking through the world with that attitude and with that knowing, and holding that as our truth, as Yogananda experienced in each of these moments. The two examples with the mosquito and the example that I shared earlier with the biospec, each one of them represents for us that reality of just taking our next step. I don't have to be angry, or rid myself of mosquito consciousness. Whatever it is that avails you. I'll tell you one more personal story, and then we'll have Keshava join us for our third chant. I have a little bit of a fear of ticks. I don't like the idea that they can glom onto you and that they carry diseases. And we were walking in this beautiful place, which is up near Marin County. I'm here in Palo Alto, so it's about 2 hours up the coast, and it's this beautiful little tiny jut of land that just goes right out into the ocean, and you're just walking along this tiny little strip of land. And I went with a large group of friends, and the wildflowers were in bloom, and the wildflowers were up to our chests. So the path was there, but you were pretty much just walking right through wildflowers, which is really, really beautiful unless you're terrified of ticks. And so I was literally walking through it like this, which I recognize does nothing, but it was just this, it was in me, and I was just nervous and anxious about it. And then, there are a field of wildflowers, and then you're safe for a little while, and then more wildflower meadows come. By the time we hit the third wildflower meadow, and I was about to put my hands up, and then I just realized, I remembered this line, and I just said, "Rid yourself of tick consciousness," and I just walked through it and enjoyed the flowers, and I didn't end up with a tick, so hopefully that worked, and hopefully it can continue to work. But it was just that recognition that I had spent so much time being anxious and afraid of something. When we magnetize things that we are afraid of. If we perseverate on something, we can actually end up magnetizing it to us. So to walk through in fearlessness, and to know that whatever comes to us in life, of course we use common sense and we take precautions, but there's nothing to be afraid of. All things will pass, but God changes not. Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you. Walking through the world with that attitude, holding that concept of right attitude and that mentality that it is God alone, and God is always with us, and God always has our back, and whatever mud we're slipping through or whatever clouds we're floating on, God is right there by our side. That's the essence of right attitude, and that's what these stories they teach us, and that's what we see in each one of them. And to hold that, it's such a beautiful gift for us as we are taking our next steps homeward toward the divine. So now we are going to move into discipline. So I'll have Keshava join us for our third chant.
Well, there are some chants that one could pick for discipline. Wake yet wake, O my saint. It's sort of a divine finger wagging. I can't play that chant, which is a good reason not to try. But I thought maybe we could focus together on learning to discipline the heart by learning to focus it on Divine Mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my Divine Mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my Divine Mother. Divine Mother, my Divine Mother. Divine Mother, my Divine Mother, Divine Mother, my Divine Mother, engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my Divine Mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my Divine Mother. Divine Mother, my Divine Mother, Divine Mother, my Divine Mother, Divine Mother, my Divine Mother, Divine Mother, my Divine Mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my Divine Mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my Divine Mother. Divine Mother, my Divine Mother, Divine Mother, my Divine Mother, Divine Mother, my Divine Mother, Divine Mother, my Divine Mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my Divine Mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my Divine Mother. Divine Mother, my Divine Mother, Divine Mother, my Divine Mother, Divine Mother, my Divine Mother, Divine Mother, my Divine Mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my Divine Mother. Engrossed is the bee of my mind on the blue lotus feet of my Divine Mother. Divine Mother, my Divine Mother, 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 Divine Mother, my Divine Mother.
Again, after these chants, I just feel like there's nothing more to be said, though I'm sure I'll find the words. As I was listening to Keshava chanting this beautiful chant, I was thinking it's all so fitting because the road we're ultimately taking toward that last quality or the final quality of devotion or spiritual yearning, I found myself just repeating all of the stories that I'm sharing with you right now when I was contemplating what stories we should share about devotion, a few new ones, but really all of these stories are about our devotion because everything is a river, a creek, a rivulet that's leading us back to that ocean of our devotion for Divine Mother. And discipline, in the midst of discipline, is that devotional aspect of the yearning and the longing for the divine. I've always loved the concept of discipline. I've always felt really drawn to it in ideology. And I'm smiling and hesitating because it's interesting. I don't actually consider myself to be very disciplined, but I feel it's sort of like that chant, "I want only thee, Lord." And so many of us have used the expression, in our minds, we feel like we're saying, "I want to want only thee, Lord." In a certain way, I feel so drawn to this aspect of devotion, of discipline. But I don't often feel like I'm very disciplined, so I can feel myself in my heart saying, I want to be very disciplined, but I, alas, am a little puppy sometimes who gets drawn off into the world and then gets tired and takes a nap and has to come back to her devotional practices and be strongly disciplined in them. But the heartbeat of discipline, again, as I could say about any of these spiritual qualities, is our devotion and our longing for the divine. And that, the lower melody or the lower notes that are used in that chant, I don't know if they're major or minor. What's lower, major or minor? Doesn't, okay. The notes that are those lower tones, it has that feeling of longing and devotion in it, so those chords that are engrossed, versus the high chipper notes. And so it has that element of longing, of that divine melancholy, as Yogananda references when saying, "I'm not running away in anger, I'm running away in divine melancholy." It has that aspect to it, listening to that chant, so you can feel that heartbeat or that pulse of devotion that's driving our next topic of discipline. The first thing that I wanted to share, which is 3 moments from the autobiography that struck me and humbled me a little bit in my own devotion. The first one comes from a conversation that Yogananda is having with Swami Paramhansa, who says that he meditates 8 hours a night, and then he still hasn't felt that the connection with the divine or union with the divine, and he's asking his guru, this is Swami Paramhansa, and saying, "How can I feel that pulse of the divine?" And the response that comes back to him is, "Meditate more." And I was thinking, oh boy, 8 hours a night and meditate more. But the resonance of the rest of that story also comes into play with, how are we meditating? And not to suggest that Swami Paramhansa was not meditating with all of his heart, but it's not often the hours that we put into meditation, but our discipline also comes from how are we meditating? Yogananda would so often say, in the chapter on Kriya Yoga, where he talks about, I don't have all the math in my mind, but he says, if you spent 8 hours doing 1,000 Kriyas, you're burning off this many thousand lifetimes, and so on and so forth. And then on the other hand, there are so many moments when he says it takes 1 or 2 Kriya breaths done perfectly to rid ourselves of our ego consciousness and to merge into those higher states of nirvikalpa samadhi. And so there's this juxtaposition of the discipline and the hours and the meditate more that Swami Paramhansa is offered there. It's to discipline our own heart and our own ego and our own desires that are drawing us out into the world. And there were a few more moments of that comes into play. The second one is one of my favorite stories from the autobiography, when Sri Yukteswar, I referenced it a little bit earlier, but he's a little bit hurt by Babaji because Babaji appears to him and he says, stay right here, and he runs home to get treats and prasad and bring them back. And when he comes back, Babaji is gone. So the next time that Babaji appears to him, which, yes, note, I said the next time, meaning that Babaji has appeared to him multiple times. The next time that Babaji appears to him with Lahiri Mahashaya, he snuffs him and he just kind of walks past him again. I know I referenced this earlier. I love it because it's just so human in us. Just that hurt and that pain is so human. And ultimately, Lahiri pretty much, I'm using colloquial language, but calls him out on it. And it's like, what are you doing? This is Babaji. And he goes on and he explains why he was hurt. And the line, of course, that Babaji responds, let me see if I can pull it. I know I wrote it down, but You were so full of excitement. I assured you that I was fairly extinguished in the ether by the gusts of your restlessness. And then Swami Kriyan, and then Swami Sri Yukteswar, he feels all of the reverence and recognizes his mistake, and he bows at his guru's feet, and he bows at Babaji's feet. And then Babaji's response to him is, Swami, you must meditate more. So again, it was the second moment that I said, oh boy, here we are with Swami Sri Yukteswar, and we're being told meditate more. And he goes on and he says, your gaze is not yet faultless. You couldn't see me hiding behind the sunshine. And it was so sweet on this dual level of the heartbeat and the pulse of discipline being devotion, because there was that aspect again, when I thought about that, your gaze is not yet faultless. I thought about my own gaze and just how faulted it is in that sense, and just how far I still have to go to peek behind the veil. But then through that discipline, through the ability to discipline ourselves and to be strict and to follow the teachings and the practices that we are given by our guru with our willpower, with the right attitude, it enacts that devotion. And there's Babaji everywhere, just hiding behind the sunshine. It was just that reality that Babaji is ultimately accessible. We imagine and we have this perception of his imperceptibility, that he chooses to reveal himself to those when and where he wants to. But I think it was at the Guru Day retreat that Sai Ganesh was speaking about Babaji, and he referenced it in a new way, which is that anyone who picks up the AY, Babaji has decided to reveal himself to them, because here he is. Maybe we're not seeing him standing in front of us, but it's a gift just to be aware of and to acknowledge who Babaji is, and to know that great soul is ever hiding behind the sunshine. But it wasn't lost on me that what comes right before that is that aspect of discipline yourself, meditate more. And so those were two smaller stories that talked about the importance of discipline being, I felt like I couldn't talk about discipline without talking about our sadhanas and talking about the importance of being disciplined in our sadhana practice and meditating more. And 8 hours a night maybe isn't enough to seek the divine, and being a great swami, and but just being excited or restless or perfunctory in a certain way for just even an instant, it means that we have to come back, and there's still more that needs to be done, more work that we need to do with our spine, because everything ultimately comes back to the energy that's flowing in our spine. And so meditation is the way that we have to work to discipline that energy. We discipline ourselves and our desires by disciplining that energy. But some other stories that came to mind when talking about discipline is the experience in cosmic consciousness. So after Yogananda is given this experience of cosmic consciousness, sheepishly coming home from his flight to the Himalayas and bowing at his guru's feet, we have this incredible experience, which I don't have the time or even the memory to quote all of what that experience was like, but just this pouring out. I cognized the center of the Empyrean as a point of intuitive perception in my own heart. So that divine sight pouring out from his own heart, from that point of devotion, that point of union and knowing. And what's always striking is that at the end of this story, or at the end of this experience, when he comes back into his body, his guru says to him, don't get over drunk with ecstasy. There is still much work to do in the world. Come, let us sweep the balcony floor. And that felt like such an echo of discipline, because for each one of us, Yogananda has said of this path, and has said of those of us who identify as his disciples and his devotees on this path of self-realization, that this is a path of where we are emphasizing deep meditation and deep inward communion with God and outward activity, that we're not going to just be reclusive. And so many times, Yogananda, that desire to just love God, I could see and I can feel and you can hear, and not necessarily all of the stories of the AY, but in the other readings and books that Paramhansa Yogananda has written, just how easy it would be to fall into that state of ecstasy and just spend his life loving Divine Mother and meditating reclusively. But he knew that he needed the discipline, that he needed to be disciplined because he had a mission, and he had to be out in the world, and he had to be acting. And so it's not lost on us that this moment is so poignant, where he's given this experience of samadhi, and he's given this experience of oneness with all that is. And when he comes back into himself and into this body, this incarnation that he's taken on, it's come, let us sweep the balcony floor. There is still more work to do. We have to stay disciplined in what it is that our guru is asking us to do, and to always be aware of that, and to thread that needle between dipping nightly into the divine ecstasy and working in the world. And then ultimately, as we refine our consciousness, those two begin to merge, and we find that in all of our activities, we're working in that state of divine ecstasy. But there is an element of discipline that comes along with that, as we are writing our heart to hear what it is that our guru is asking us to do. You know, somebody asked Swami Kriyananda once, how do I know what my dharma is? And his response was, if it's looking right, if something needs to be done and you're next to do it, it's your dharma. I believe I might be paraphrasing, but that's your dharma. Pick it up and do it. And so it's this idea that we don't always necessarily have to step back and find, again, those grandiose concepts of what is my purpose in life. Our purpose in life is to serve the guru. Our purpose in life is to always be directionally heading progressively closer and closer to that place in the divine. And so this aspect of marrying and merging these moments of divine ecstasy and deep meditation and activity in the world, and the discipline of following through with our obligations and our responsibilities, however those have manifested, it's an important thing for us to reflect on and to introspect on as truth seekers living in this world, living in the material plane. And a third story, which I happen to love, and we don't hear very often because it's a little bit dramatic and intense, is the story of the devotee who climbs up the cliffs to seek Babaji, and he wants to be initiated into Babaji's tribe, Babaji's group of devotees. And so he climbs up and he comes upon Babaji, and he says, "You must take me as your disciple. If you don't, I'll throw myself off this cliff." And Babaji says, "Then throw yourself off the cliff. You're not yet prepared. You're not yet purified." What's the word he uses? You're not yet... I can't remember, you're not yet ready, is the essence of it, to be a disciple. And so the man throws himself off the cliff. And it's such a powerful example of discipline, because it's complete surrender and complete discipline to what the guru, or in this case, what the teacher is asking him to do. And Babaji says to his disciples, go and bring back the body of the man who's just thrown himself off the cliff. And he resurrects him, and he says, now you are ready. You have courageously passed this most important test, and now you are part of our immortal tribe. And the discipline in that, of course, I'm not suggesting that any of us head toward any cliffs, but it's that question of, what am I willing to do? What am I willing to stand up against in the midst of living my life as a truth seeker? And that may be coming up against our family members who are asking us to not spend so much time in meditation, or to come home for the holidays when you want to stay and be at a celebration or an event or a program, and you want to be able to stay inward. It may be coming up against those questions of, am I supposed to stay at my job, or am I supposed to be serving in a job which will give me more opportunity to spend in my spiritual practices? So that proverbial cliff that each one of us is throwing ourselves off again, that each one of us may be asked to throw ourselves off, it doesn't actually appear to be a cliff, but it's that discipline to come in and say, am I choosing rightly? Am I using my willpower? Am I using right attitude? And do I have the discipline to say yes to my guru, to say yes to what I know is going to help me to take the next step? And when we are all in the way that this devotee is, and we can courageously pass those tests and say, yes, I believe that the Divine Mother will take care of me. So maybe that means I am leaving my high-paying job so that I have more time to be with my family and to help raise my family with these spiritual teachings. Maybe it means saying to a family member, you know what, I don't think that I can be with you when your energy is like this. So I'm going to take a step back and love you unconditionally, but not be with you. You know, whatever those aspects are that are so extremely difficult for us, that whatever those challenges are that are so extremely difficult for us to face, we can ask ourselves the question, what is my guru asking me to do? Or what is the teacher asking me to do? And if we don't have a guru that we identify with as our teacher, it's asking ourselves, what do I know to be truth? And how am I adhering to truth? And how am I staying disciplined on the path to do what I know is right, to take my next step closer and closer to the divine? So that is it for discipline. Now we're going to move on to faith, attunement, and receptivity.
This is one of Yogananda's chants, pole star of my life. I have made thee pole star of my life. Though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, still I see the path through thy mercy. I have made thee pole star of my life. I have made thee pole star of my life. Though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, still I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy. I have made thee pole star of my life. I have made thee pole star of my life. Though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, still I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy. I have made thee pole star of my life. I have made thee pole star of my life. Though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, still I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy. I have made thee pole star of my life. I have made thee pole star of my life. Though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, still I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy. I have made thee pole star of my life. I have made thee pole star of my life. I have made thee pole star of my life. I have made thee pole star of my life.
As Keshava was chanting, I was just thinking, now we're getting to the good stuff. Now we're into receptivity, attunement, faith, and ultimately devotion and yearning. Now it's all heart. It's just that bhakti spirit. And receptivity, the law of magnetism and of receptivity and the application of faith in our lives. What is striking in the stories that I'll share from the autobiography in this is the law of magnetism is not one-sided. It's not one-directional. The law of magnetism is two things being magnetized together. Or the application and the practice of faith, it's not just on behalf of the devotee casting his love and his support and his devotion to this omniscient amorphous being. It's an exchange. Through the practice and the application of faith comes the ability to lift our consciousness into that divine grace and into that divine knowing, which is not the way that we're always taught to share our devotion and to practice faith when on spiritual, with our spiritual backgrounds. And so what struck me in contemplating stories of faith and receptivity in the autobiography, the first are just the playful aspects of Mukunda when he's young Mukunda, playing with Divine Mother, and the response, the call of love and the response that comes. And the two stories that stick out most readily is first the story of the kites, when I believe he's on the rooftop with his sister Uma, and Uma asks him, "What are you thinking?" And he says, "Oh, I was just thinking about how wonderful it is that Divine Mother gives me whatever I ask of her." And she goes on to kind of scoff at him and challenges him to ask for the kites. And off in the distance, these young boys are playing with kites, and he goes on to explain that in India they would play kind of a game of war where you can tie sharp shards to your kite's tail and try and war and battle for the other person's kite. And one of the kites is severed from its string, and it floats just perfectly and right down onto the balcony or the space where he can just untie it and grab it, and he has his first kite. And the pessimistic Uma comes back and says, "Well, that was a coincidence." And again, he prays to Divine Mother and asks for the kite, and the second kite in a similar fashion comes floating toward him. And it's an example of faith because he's just putting his faith, here I am. I mean, I don't think I've ever just stood up and uttered the words, "I just think it's wonderful how Divine Mother gives me whatever I ask for." I wouldn't dare challenge her with those words because I don't have the faith in that, necessarily. As I'm saying it, that sounds terrible. I should start uttering that. But, to have that sort of faith, and even in the playfulness, in the story when he's a child and he wants the candies and he's imagining that I don't remember where exactly this is from, but I believe Yogananda's he's crying out and he wants the candies, and his parents run out to buy him sweetmeats. And it's not about the need or the desire for the thing, right? That's where our attachment or our desire or our prayer, where we say, "Oh, Divine Mother, can you please give me this?" Along with that comes the attachment. I want it because it will make me happy. I want it because it's going to make me more successful. There's an ego engagement involved here. But this faith in the story of the kites, it's just an expression of, my mother loves me and she'll bring me whatever I ask, and she'll bring me sweetmeat treats, and she'll bring me kites. And the story that's not from the AY but that I've always loved is with the shortbread biscuits, when he's driving through this little town of Laguna Beach and he stops for shortbread biscuits, Yogananda and a group of disciples. And the woman says, "There are no more there are no more shortbread biscuits." And he sort of says to Divine Mother, "Why did you even put the intention or the desire in my heart?" And again, it's not a desire that's held on to anything. So it's not the same way that we use the term desire. And suddenly the woman comes running out and she says, "I was saving these for someone, but I'll bake him more." And it's just that sweet relationship of give and take that exists in that expression of faith. And these are those playful moments of having faith. And the second playful moment, which I won't have time to share the whole story, but many of us know it well, is two penniless boys in Vrindavan, which has a strong spiritual moral lesson in it as well. But here Yogananda is, and his Ananda challenges him, can you spend the entire day without any money, make your way back, not miss a single meal? And he says yes, and his friend is a little skeptical, saying, can we at least have some safety money in case? And he says, no, we won't. We don't need any money. We'll live on Divine Mother's love. And throughout the course of the story, again, many of us know they're well fed like princes, in fact, and they're toward the city, and they're given train tickets home, and they come back showering all of their gifts and the coins that they're given and the money that they're given at Ananta's feet, and Ananta bows down to Yogananda and says, the law of supply and demand is not limited to the material world, and it's a moment for Ananta to awaken up. So there's a deep awaken. So there is a deep spiritual lesson in it, but there's also the playfulness of two penniless boys in Vrindavan and just experiencing and playing with Divine Mother. And those are expressions of deep faith. And then the other aspect of faith that comes into play throughout the story is the receptivity of the disciple to the guru, of the student to the guru. And two powerful examples, two meetings, the first one being Yogananda's meeting of his guru, and just the love and the devotion. I mean, he can't even move his feet. He's just solidified where he is, and every time he tries to walk away, this magnetic draw is pulling him back, and he can't walk away. He can only walk toward his guru. That magnetism and that receptivity, and then here they are, and Swami Shri Yukteswar just showers his love and says, oh, my own, I've been waiting for you to return. And there's this sweet relationship of give and exchange. It was not lost on me in both of these examples, the second one being Lahiri meeting Babaji and materializing a golden palace. One of my favorite lines from the autobiography comes right after Yogananda meets Shri Yukteswar. And he says, Shri Yukteswar says to him, if ever you see me falling from, I'm not going to get it all, but if ever you see me falling from divine consciousness, lay me in your lap and help me to remember, return me to our beloved cosmic mother whom we both worship. There is such humility and such grace in that moment. Here is the disciple bowing down at his guru's feet, and the guru is saying, if ever you see me falling from divine consciousness, lay me in your lap. Just the chela aspect, that childlike aspect, that divine humility. There is a relationship between these two avatars that's witnessed and recognized, that the role they're playing of disciple and guru, beneath that is also this relationship of equals that exists, because when God meets God, there is a humble exchange that is inherently enacted. And that's the magnetism of God meeting God. That's the magnetism of opening our hearts in receptivity now in order to feel the divine attraction, in order to feel the receptivity of the guru's love, of divine love. And again, that second example coming with Babaji and Lahiri Mahashaya meeting. And it's just so beautiful. It's a shame that we're close to our end time, because the most beautiful stories are the ones that we have to rush a little bit more. But such is the nature of time and space in this material world. When Babaji is saying, this is your bowl, don't you remember this bowl? Or this is your rug where you would meditate, don't you remember? I've kept it for you. There's just such sweetness and love. And there's an exchange. Again, it's what stands out in these stories, both in Divine Mother offering a kite to Mukunda, or in the exchange of receptivity and faith in the guru, between the guru-disciple relationship, is that mathematical equation, or that mathematical certainty that when we offer our willpower, through our willpower, our devotion and our energy, our faith and our love to the divine cannot help but respond back, whether that's through the channel of the guru, whether it's through a kite that she leaves floating and tangled up in the little cactus right next to us so we can pick it up. When we are yearning for our beloved, the beloved has to respond. And when we act in that faith and in that knowing, when we call out with that knowing, then it is a certainty that the divine will respond to us. And these stories represent that so beautifully, the devotion and the love that Babaji felt to maintaining this space for Lahiri, for his disciple to come back and to be reawakened, just all of the sweetness of that. And then he goes on to materialize a golden palace for him, full of rubies and jewels. And he says to Lahiri, as Lahiri's walking through this incredible palace, he says to him, you are feasting on these earthly desires. And then he says, come, you are now rid of them. And he taps him at the spiritual eye. And he says, let us go and meditate. I'll initiate you into Kriya Yoga. So there's all of that love and compassion and that the sweetness that exists in that magnetic exchange. When we offer our faith and our devotion to the divine calls back to us. Again, it is unequivocal. It is a certainty. It is our promise as children of the divine. And that is represented so beautifully in these stories. Last summer, a group of us, there was a large group of us, about 30 or so people who participated in a program called Living Discipleship. And at the end of the program, we put on a little production as a thank you for all of the teachers who had come together to help us and to lead us in classes throughout the course of the program. And it was Keshava's inspiration to write a story about really just meeting the disciple meeting the guru in each of our line. So starting all the way back with Krishna and Arjuna and up through Swami Kriyananda Jyotish and Swami Kriyananda. And it was so, I was one of the narrators, that was my role, so I actually got to stay out and watch the whole process of it happen, and just watching one after another these stories of these great masters, of God recognizing God in that moment of meeting the guru and bowing at that divine quality, but the mutual love and respect and the mutual knowing that existed in each of those moments. It was profound to just watch one after another as Arjuna meets Krishna, and then as Christ and Babaji come together to shepherd in a new wave of spirituality, a new dispensation in the West. And then as Lahiri meets Babaji, as Sri Yukteswar meets Lahiri, as Yogananda meets Sri Yukteswar, and then Swami Kriyananda and Jyotish to continue the line for our Ananda family. There is a powerful recognition in the receptivity of divine grace. And as I've said over and over again, but it's the perfect way to end this little section, it is not only the mathematical, through that mathematical certainty, when we call out to the divine, she is there, she is waiting, and she will respond to us with such a profound love that we couldn't even begin to imagine. And that's what we see in each of these examples. And I'm going to just slide right into devotion quickly and just share a few thoughts about it, so we won't have our last chant. But to end, we're already pretty much there. We're pretty much sitting at the feet of devotion with these stories. And every single story that we've talked about today, in its essence, its seedling is just is impregnated with that spirit of devotion, that spirit of yearning for God, because without that desire to know God, nothing else falls into place. Our willpower is misdirected. Our attitude, even if it feels like we're acting in right attitude, it's directed at something that's outward in the world. Our discipline, we may be disciplined, but it's not disciplined towards the right pole star. I have made the pole star of my life. So when we come together with each of the stories and we look at all of the examples that we've shared today, every single aspect of this book is impregnated with every single aspect or every single story and experience. I shouldn't just say this book, of the autobiography of a yogi is impregnated with the spirit of devotion and the yearning for God, from the very first page to the very last page. I was speaking with my family just very briefly last night And several years ago, I'd given my dad a copy of the Autobiography, and he said, oh yeah, I read it twice. And he said, I read it once all the way through, and then he said, the second time I picked it up right in the middle. He said, because all of the stories about his early life, they weren't as interesting to me as Law of Miracles and Kriya Yoga and all of the chapters that are a little bit more esoteric, but which is wonderful and beautiful, and I'm happy that he's finding whatever he needs to find from the book. But when I was reflecting on that thought and thinking, from the very first page to the very last page, every single word is sacred and every single word is important and relevant to those of us who are seeking truth, because it is vibrating with that yearning and that devotion to know God and to be with God. And the love of the divine is so powerful in this text. I'll leave us with just one final story, or perhaps two. The story of Mataji and Babaji, when Ram Gopal and Lahiri and Mataji are with Babaji, and this is, we are given the story of Mataji pleading with Babaji. Babaji is saying, I'm going to leave my body, and Mataji says, if it doesn't make a difference to you, then stay in your body and stay here and be, the yogi avatar for this worldly cycle that we're in. And he says, through your words, through your plea, God has spoken, and he has committed to staying as the eternal, the deathless saint, the Maha Avatar, who is holding our entire planet. When I read that the very first time that I read this book, I knew this path was mine, because there was no doubt, I knew this was my path. That's the way to say it. Because there was no doubt in my mind that that was true, that was exactly what had happened, and that was exactly what Babaji was doing. And I was overwhelmed with the sensation of love and just the gratitude for how much these masters care about us, and just how much every single thing that we experience in this book, every story, I could pick any story. We could just start on page 1 and read through to page 500 and 60, whatever it is where the book ends. And every single word is an expression of that devotion. Just like the devotion, it's so touching to think that Babaji is here eternally watching over us, praying for us, holding each one of us. We feel that energy from each of the masters, and it's so clearly expressed through the course of this book, through each of our stories. It is, they're written for us, for our own awakening. And the power and the love of that, it can't help but awaken our hearts. And I'll leave us with just this one final expression, which is the chapter on Kashi. Kashi is a young boy at the Ranchi school, and he asks Master, the boys are just sitting around and saying, what am I going to be? What's going to happen to me in life? And Kashi asks, and Master says, you're going to die soon. And he's a little taken aback, and Kashi is a little bit distraught about it. And Kashi comes to Yogananda later, and he says, if I'm going to die soon, do you promise that you'll find me? And Yogananda, he talks about the hesitancy in that, because a promise that the master makes, that the avatar makes, it's not easily broken. He has to be sure, which is why, when a disciple at various points in here says, can I experience cosmic consciousness? Give me an experience of the divine. The answer is not always yes, sure, because the disciple needs to be ready, and the master is not going to say yes simply to please us. That is a promise that is set in stone, and there's a vibration to it that is solidified. And so after some contemplation, he says to Kashi, I will do what I can to find you. And he talks about throughout this, it's a short chapter, it's only 3 pages long, he talks about sending out through yogic techniques his radio wave messaging to find Kashi and to search for him. And he's always constantly looking until he finally feels the resonance of Kashi's soul in the stomach of a pregnant woman. And he goes and he meets the family, and he tells the story about how their son is going to be a yogi and a renunciate. And that story, just to finish the story, Kashi is born. He's renamed Kashi, and eventually he finds Yogananda, and Yogananda sends him to a teacher in the Himalayan mountains, where he was able to live that life of dedication and devotion to God. But the relevance of the story of Kashi is that Kashi is each one of us. Anybody who calls out to the Guru, anyone who asks for that commitment of the Guru to protect my life and to watch over my life, the Guru is with us. And all of that longing and all of that desire and all of the energy and effort that Yogananda puts in to finding Kashi, incarnation after incarnation after incarnation, that's the promise that he's offering to each one of us. When we have the Guru with us, when we have the teacher guiding us on our path home to God, we're never alone, and he's always calling out for each one of us. And this is the essence of devotion, because what could open our hearts more than to know that the Master is always with us, that the Guru is always watching out for us. I think that's the perfect place to end for today. I hope that you have enjoyed storytelling. I hope that you've had your tea and your beautiful chair where you could sit down and enjoy. And I hope that we can again have a part 2 where we get to share more and more stories from this beautiful scripture and from the vibration of each of these wonderful